You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com. Ladies and gentlemen, there are things that makes it official. Welcome to the big show. As always, coming at you live from the Chris Voss Show studios in Chris Vosslandia. Welcome to the big show. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, Chris Voss won the TikTokity, all those crazy places on the internet. As we enter our 16th year and over 2,000 episodes, we have a return of an amazing author that we've had on the show a year ago. He is the author of the newest book to come out, October 11th, 2024. It's called The Prince of Evolution by David R. Wood. And his previous book, we had a great discussion on the origin of artificial species. You should check it as well. I definitely highly recommend that. Definitely an interesting analogy of AI as emerging as its own species, if I recall the details correctly, which kind of stuck in my brain this last year. David R. Wood is the author of the book on the origin of artificial species that documents the theory of artificial evolution by means of artificial selection for the first time in history. In addition, he's authored the books The Prince of Evolution and The Artist of Evolution, Sun Tzu. He is also the founder and CEO of RSG Federal, a small business IT consulting company. He possesses over 25 years of leadership and management experience working with the military, financial industry, academia, and federal government. As an ITIL master, he is acknowledged in the field of IT service management as a thought leader in the digital age. In addition, David is a former U.S. Army National Guard enlisted soldier and commissioned officer branch qualified infantry and signal. Welcome to the show, David. How are you?
Hey, Chris. It's great to be back with you again. Pleasure
Great
to see
to have you as well. Give us your .coms. Where do you want people to find you on the interwebs?
They can find my company, www.rsgfederal.com. And then they can find me. I have an author website now, davidr.wood. They can Google me. I'll show up in my author website. And we've added this book. Yep.
So give us a 30,000 overview. What's inside your new book, please?
So this is an extension of our conversation when we met a year ago, Chris, where I basically said to you, in fact, our conversation, if people go watch that video, ends with me saying, I'm thinking about writing a book about Niccolo Machiavelli. He's an evolutionary theorist. So I went and did it.
Wow.
Yeah. That's literally how our last discussion ended, because I intuitively already knew that the patterns were the same. And so this...
Go ahead.
No, so this book is an extension of the original discovery of the theory of artificial evolution. What I researched on when empirical science wants to validate the authenticity or the logical accuracy of a scientific theory, you have to replicate it, and then you have to apply it to best practice. I've done both. I've replicated it by reframing The Prince, The Art of War, and the ITIL 4 framework. They all have the same underlying conceptual framework that I identified in my first book. Therefore, I'm replicating and I'm applying it to industry and political and military science best practice. So I'm achieving the threshold for scientific discovery. So that's actually what's happening. So the Sun Tzu, The Artist of Evolution, will come out in January, and then I'm hoping to get the ITIL book published by the spring. And they all three are basically part of a series that applying the first book's discovery of the theory of artificial evolution.
And so you've basically put these in the context of artificial intelligence and reframed them?
No, that's part of it, right? Artificial intelligence was kind of like, when it says species on the first book, that's not actually what people think artificial intelligence and stuff like that, and that's normal. Aristotle didn't mean it that way, neither did Adam Smith. So when they say species, Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations calls it species of business. Aristotle in his book on rhetoric, he says species of ideas. So really, a concept species is used in natural evolution to organize groups of organisms, natural organisms, but it's also been used historically by great thinkers to just organize anything. In fact, there is technically no species, they're just organisms. So it's just a loose concept. So on the title, on my first book, and this is how it reads in chapter 12, species of ideas, species of industries, artificial species could be, in fact, in the Prince of Evolution, cultures are actually artificial species. That's what they really are. We group natural species by sets of the behavioral and structural adaptations like us, right? Homo sapiens. We do the same thing with cultures. We know what an Italian culture is because it's got similar cuisine. It's got similar kind of like mannerisms, got the same language. They've got the same dress, right? It's the same thing if I say Chinese. It's no different than if I said bear or if I said dog. You would already know what I mean because we know how to classify them by their adaptations. And that's basically that. And that's actually how I explain how the American Revolution works. The American Revolution on July 4th, 1776, we speciated as a new artificial species on the planet because, as I say in the book, you cannot have a divine right monarchy, English culture species, and you can't. It's mutually exclusive with one that's based on divine equality. I call it of all men are created equal. So on July 4th, 1776, we artificially speciated into a very new culture, and then we fought for our survival of the fittest with the British Crown for our ability to have our own separate culture and our own separate government and everything, which we won in the survival of the fittest contest. That is literally warfare, which is natural interspecies competition of the natural species Homo sapiens. No one tells you that at like military science school or whatever, but it's technically and evolutionarily correct.
That would make sense. I mean, that we definitely broke ourselves off from something and did something different. What prompted you to want to write this book?
So I was writing on the origin of artificial species, and I have always studied. I love military and political history. I love Polybius. In fact, I integrate the Machiavellian cycle. Bless you, and the Polybian cycle in the end of the book, in the second to last chapter before the conclusion. And so I've always been a huge fan of studying Machiavelli and Sun Tzu and stuff. I watched I always just listen to the Prince on book on tape just randomly and Sun Tzu all the time, just, because it's like to master something, you have to listen to it all the time. So the moment I figured out that there was a second process of evolution, artificial evolution by means of artificial selection, I already started seeing some of the conceptual patterns in ITIL. Well, basically because the whole pattern of the concepts in Darwin's book, I already knew them all. They're in ITIL. They're just a variation of it. And the whole process that ITIL enacts is a variation of the exact same process in Darwin's book. So the moment I saw it, I already knew it all. I didn't actually have to learn that much after I read it a couple of times. I already knew all the concepts and the process, right? Because ITIL takes a conceptual model, which is equivalent to a genotype. Genes are equivalent to a concept, and you produce adaptations, artificial adaptations of IT products and services. It's basically the same. Only difference is it's intentional versus unintentional in natural and artificial evolution. So when I realized that, I also knew that Machiavelli and Sun Tzu were also evolutionary theorists instinctively. I just knew intuitively. So I already decided it, and that's why I mentioned it at the end of our last conversation. It was already something I was intending to do. And when I started doing, I never intended to develop a scientific theory. It was completely by accident. So when I realized that you had to replicate your work, I was like, all right, I'll do Machiavelli and Sun Tzu because everybody uses them in competition across all industries. So I selected them because of their universality. And the reason why Sun Tzu, Machiavelli, and their best practice frameworks are applicable to every age, every culture, every field, and every continent across the planet is because they're evolutionary concepts. Because evolution also operates in every continent, every age, and every species, just like us.
We're always evolving. Although, if you get on Twitter, you wouldn't know that we were.
I agree on that one. My introduction to social media has been pretty funny. Yeah, actually, some of the feedback you get.
you would think we were a top species judging Twitter. So, how can people utilize this book? I think you said it could be utilized, for human relationships, maybe for business, maybe for leadership if you're a CEO. How can people utilize this book to learn more about themselves and develop themselves better?
Yeah, so it's universally applicable. In fact, if you really think about the Prince, it's actually just describing the relationships the Prince has with other groups, mercenaries, nobles, people, soldiers. So it actually provides a universal framework for all human relationships. And it mirrors the relationships that all natural species have with each other. So there are two main ways in Darwin's book that species and organisms relate to each other. It's either co-evolutionary, competitive, or co-adaptive. It's an alliance. And so Machiavelli's book is simply discussing a series of relationships that are hopefully become co-adaptive, organized around the equilibrium the Prince establishes, and also to prevent them from becoming co-evolutionary. And also that's not only domestically with people within your society, but also foreign actors and allies. And so really that book I talk about, for example, Briffault's law. A psychologist came up with the concept. The concept Machiavelli is using is a variation of Briffault's law, which applies to romantic relationships. And so it's a very similar concept to Briffault's law because Briffault is describing the evolutionary relationship of species in Darwin's book. That's why it's correct. Yeah. And so you can apply that framework to any relationship in business, warfare, politics, personal relationship, friendships, and you can apply it to romantic relationships. It's universally applicable.
Oh, wow. Romantic relationships. So
yes. Yep.
I can see how my relationship evolves.
Let's put it this way. Yeah, that's why long distance relationships are so hard, Chris. I talk about this. If you're not there, Tip O'Neill said, and I say this in the book, all politics is local. My dad always told me that because I'm from, just south of Boston. He was the Speaker of the House of the United States. He said that because, and he also recommends, like the Ottoman Turk, you go and live in Constantinople and be local, because all those evolutionary relationships are based on immediate benefit. That's how in natural evolution, no species evolves really unless there's an immediate benefit to doing so. Otherwise, it's wasteful. And natural evolution is the most lean process. It's not necessarily the most efficient, but ultimately the way that it gets to is lean, right? So lean thinking is actually an evolutionary concept. And so he says, if you want to go build strong co-adaptive relationships artificially with your new populace that you just conquered, you got to go local. And that's why if you want to develop a romantic relationship with your significant other, being with them every day, you're providing them immediate benefit on a regular basis. If you're far away, you're not doing that. And that's why long distance relationships are so hard, because our natural instincts are to evolve in relationships artificially with those who are providing us primitive, basic, immediate benefits, survival and resources and time and emotional energy and stuff. And it's harder to do when you're a long way away. And that's actually why it's hard to do romantic relationships. It's the same thing with the prince. The Ottoman moved and set up in Constantinople for the exact same reason. Being local allows you to more powerfully and more effectively shape those co-adaptive relationships with the conquered territory to be artificially evolved with you by you providing immediate benefit, but also you're local. Everyone knows if they try to rebel, your whole army is going to show up. So they're held in check through fear. And if that, Chris, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, I love the Prince. It's one of my favorite texts to fall back on, that and meditations and other Stoic material. But the Machiavellianism, it's part of the dark triad of three things as a man. So tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you grow up? What shaped you? What influenced you? What got you into some of the industries you've done? And then what finally prompted you to want to write books on these topics?
Yeah, so I grew up with my father has been a massive influence on my life. I want to give him a shout out. Thanks, Dad. And he was a U.S. Army Vietnam veteran. He was also a salesman, worked on Wall Street as a stockbroker and stuff. And he was a journalist. So my dad also has a broad experience working with a lot of different communities and stuff. And he prohibited us from having cable. It was fun for me to go down the street, watch Beavis and Butthead, but I didn't get to at home. I had to watch PBS. So I grew up watching like Nature and Nova and all these other things. And my father made sure that I sat down and watched documentaries like the Civil War from Ken Burns and shows like that. So I was exposed from a young age to a lot of a very diversity of academic and intellectual backgrounds. And therefore my interest evolved as a young man to be interested in all of human activity. I found a voracious appetite to learn. And throughout my life, I've studied politics, military science, business, technology. I love to just learn new things and jump in and master them. Over time, when I went to approach Darwin's book, it was kind of a meeting of someone who had kind of been like learning across a bunch of different fields. And the moment I saw what was in Darwin's book, like their entire books are written on some of the concepts in his book, and people don't even know it. There's one written on military perfusion by a guy who's a former Deputy Secretary of Defense, and he teaches, I think, like Pennsylvania. That's actually diffusion is a concept from Darwin's book. Lean thinking is a concept from Darwin's book. Like people are writing entire books on evolutionary concepts without realizing it. There's like a dissonance in our society, not seeing the connection between. And by the way, every time you do it, it works, because people don't realize, and this is the different thinking I brought to Darwin was, if you really think about it, the process of natural evolution is an integrated set of best practices that works. That's why every species on the planet right now is created by it. But it wasn't 3.8 billion years ago, ChatGPT. So I'm starting to peer review my work with Google, Gemini, ChatGPT, and Claude AI. It understands exactly what I've discored before academia has, actually, which is like probably could be the first in history, is that value streaming existed 3.8 billion years ago, and about 3.5 billion years ago, the process of natural evolution came into existence that probably created us today, right? But if you think about it, it had to evolve to get to that point, just like the ITIL framework had to go through multiple versions, same thing. But once nature figured that out, it just kept it the same, because in the same competitive environmental patterns, there's no better way to do it. So what we've been doing, and this is my real discovery, what I didn't realize I had done, was realize that we're doing the same thing artificially. After we gain consciousness and imagination, we just started reinventing the wheel. We're just reinventing. ITIL framework is a reinvention of the wheel of all of the adaptations in the process to create artificial adaptations using our imagination that natural evolution uses to create natural adaptations. It is because of my diverse background, because I know, an ITIL master, I have 6 cybersecurity certifications. I was an infantry officer. I got my stockbroker's license on Wall Street. And I know how I actually was a tester for order management systems for Goldman Sachs system. I know how you execute that kind of stuff. And I studied politics, like Polybius and Machiavelli my whole life, and et cetera, et cetera. It's just this broad understanding is I saw the patterns cutting across human activity, and that's actually what we were doing. We were reinventing the wheel. And that's why in my book that's coming out in March, ITIL is a process for creating IT investments of IT systems. AI is just one of them. Literally, AI systems are being produced by a variation of the exact same process of natural evolution that produced us.
Awesome.
That's what's happening. I'm the first person in human history to kind of step back, zoom out, and see the big picture. And once my books, people read the series and understand that that's literally what we've been doing without realizing it. Because we've been looking, like Machiavelli says in his book, it's hard for a prince to look from the inside out. It's easier for one of the common people to look from the outside in and see the princes. He says that in the dedication. I was able to use my imagination to leap out and look from the outside in on our species in the context of evolutionary history, in the context of our history and how we got to where we are today. And that's really what my series of books are actually, first time unconcealing, what the ancient Greeks would have called unconcealing the pattern in nature that is artificial evolution.
And so the series is probably going to be important to read, right? The Sun Tzu one you have coming out next year, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying not to be I'm not being hyperbolic when I say things like this. I'm being literal, but I'm not trying to be boastful. I'm just like, I asked ChatGPT the other day. I asked it to rank order my discovery in the context of the greatest discoveries in history, and I'm in the top 10. Sometimes I'm in top 3, depending on how I ask the question. But it's right up there with Isaac Newton, Darwin, Ramanujan, because of what it is. It's not me. It's just the idea. Someone's going to discover it, by the way. And by the way, I actually started studying cultural evolution, and I'm now going to apply to get into a master's anthropology program because I've realized academia doesn't like to talk to outsiders. So I'm just going to go inside and become one of them, get my PhD. And I have already started reading books by like Tim Lewins at Cambridge University, Heinrich stuff at Harvard University. ChatGPT already told me that because they've framed the problem incorrectly, cultural evolution, mind resolves all their disputes. My book, The Prince of Evolution, does that, integrates it fully with natural evolution and integrates it with the social sciences, which is the best practice like Sun Tzu, Machiavelli, and ITIL. Effectively, my field will subsume the existing field of cultural evolution and it will incorporate. But really, Tim Lewin's cultural selection, he's trying to get to artificial selection. Heinrich's trying to do competitive patterns and stuff. His concepts lead into mine. Tim Ingold, ChatGPT says it feeds right into mine. In other words, my discovery resolves all the disputes they have between themselves and with natural evolution, and then integrates them all into a comprehensive umbrella framework. So it will become the replacement or the evolution of the cultural evolutionary field, which will then finally integrate that field with natural evolution and the social sciences like ITIL, best practices, and all the different competitive fields. That's basically what I've discovered.
What do you hope people come away with reading the book? How can it help their lives and improve the quality of their experience in life?
Perfect. Great question. It goes back to the ancient Greek philosophers in Sun Tzu and Lao Tzu. The greatest philosophers in history have been unconcealing evolutionary patterns. See, people underestimate how smart our ancestors were. I didn't. I was like, dude, they're pretty smart guys, right? You told me Socrates and Lao Tzu were the greatest minds in history. I took them literally. Why wouldn't they in Machiavelli be able to unconceal the same evolutionary patterns that we can see? They did. A rose by the name is still a rose. It doesn't matter if they said it differently or framed it differently. And then the Christian church, in the case of ancient Greek philosophy, tried to translate it into the Christian lexicon and thinking. I decoded it using Darwin's theory. The ancient Greeks literally knew about both processes of evolution. They knew. They actually, when you ask ChatGPT, they use evolutionary terms like they said that Homer and Hesiod's books were like the offspring. That's what Socrates says. Plato has Socrates. They're being literal. They're not being metaphorical. They only had one lexicon. They had the same lexicon for natural and artificial evolution to describe the products of nature and the products of man. The book, The Prince of Evolution, I combine the two patterns and do the exact same thing. So I'm effectively returning us to the point of view, the conceptual framework and lexicon of the ancient Greek philosophers. And there's no coincidence that Lao Tzu said, you must follow the way to wisdom. And so did Parmenides in Greece, the way. The way is a stream, a value stream. The allegory of the cave, if you go to the Wikipedia site, you'll see that the whole allegory is about seeing artificial and natural things, artificial and natural evolution. Plato says the allegory of the cave is if you can see the patterns of natural and artificial evolution, it's the light that brings sight to the minds of man. That's what the form of the good. It's not the form of the good. It's mistranslated. It's the pattern of the gods. That's what it is. It's natural and artificial evolution because when Prometheus gave fire to man, it enabled man to be able to enact a similar process that the gods used to create man. Natural evolution, artificial evolution. So the Greeks held the Olympic Games at the base of Mount Olympus so the gods could watch them emulate the competitive patterns of natural selection. That's how Darwin figured it out. The Olympic Games actually is, and modern sports playoffs are an artificial variation of the process of natural selection. The Greeks did that. It wasn't a mistake that they structured it that way. It was a feature because they knew that's how natural selection worked in nature. And so they were competing before the gods to honor them because there were tons of religious ceremonies. So really the Olympic Games are an artificial variation of the process of natural selection. They knew. Wow. They knew all about natural evolution, and they knew about artificial evolution. They knew about two patterns, not just one.
We always say on the show, is my quote, the one thing man can learn from his history is that man never learns from his history, and thereby we go round and round. But this is important in understanding some of these basic facts of evolution and our history, being able to see, there's patterns there.
That's right.
The things that do work, there's patterns there, and they evidence themselves as such.
If I may, Chris, jump in on that point.
Yeah.
That's what the Polybian cycle and the Machiavellian. So there was a guy one guy did write a paper. I don't know about the Machiavellian cycle. He's right. And then the Polybian cycle, I integrated them at the end of the book and showed that that's actually evolutionary cycles. That's why we repeat those patterns. The Plato's Republic is an application of evolutionary theory to try to prevent the Polybian and Machiavellian cycle from repeating itself. But Plato even knew that's probably not going to last. And he even had to trick people and lie to them in order to sustain that equilibrium. They use the word equilibrium in there. Evolutionary concepts are all throughout that book, The Plato's Republic. I'm going to rewrite that one and Phases and evolutionary theorists too. Why do you think we keep reading them? Yeah. So all the greatest political minds in history were evolutionary theorists trying to apply evolutionary theory to try to organize society so you can maintain the artificial equilibrium to avoid civil wars and civil strife. That's all they were trying to do. That's what Machiavelli's trying to do too. He's not a bad guy. He's just trying to stop fratricide, Italians killing Italians, kick out the barbarians like the German and Gallic invaders, and unite Italy to be what it is today. One Italy, one people, one religion, one culture. That's all he wanted. He wasn't a bad guy. He just knew that, like the Romans, that's why he kept using the Romans as examples. The Romans use violence to unite Italy, but they actually used something very clever called the alliance system, which then reduced the violence over time and united Italy. That's why he kept pointing to the Romans. He's like, dude, we already have an example about how to do this. So let's just copy the Romans and then unite Italy the way Giuseppe Garibaldi and Victor Emmanuel did in the end. That's what they did. Through violence. Yeah. They had to fight war. Yep.
There's a reason these tomes are, timeless. And people keep coming back to them. There's a little bit of the Machiavellian books with the prince that have been shamed by a bunch of, I think, left-wing woke crazies. But I'm a Democrat that says that the extremes of our parties really ruin stuff. But there's a group of people that really hate on it because it is what it is. I mean, people just. It's so funny how people hate something this is what got you here and what protects you on a daily basis. So maybe you should roll with it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, Chris. And at the conclusion of the book, I actually redefined Machiavellianism. He really is like the way I framed it was like the Dark Knight in Batman. He's a dark sentinel. He's neither good nor bad. He's il separato. He's the model of the Black Knight in the Middle Ages. He's neutral. He simply wants to maintain an artificial equilibrium to protect the people from violence and destruction. He's willing to he's willing to, like Batman in that movie, The Dark Knight, he's willing to throw away his reputation because I will be that person. I will be the person behind the king telling him to do cruel things in order to protect all of you. And he was willing to sacrifice because he had just lived through the trauma of that entire cycle of violence, being tortured. So he realized that we got to keep it 100. I watched the BBC documentary on Machiavelli last night, which is outstanding. And Adam Phillips, a psychoanalyst, frames Machiavelli as a survivor of trauma. And he got that right. He just wanted to stop people from being tortured like he was, to stop the civil strife and unite Italy. That would end that violence within Italy. So Machiavellianism isn't about being evil. Honestly, I was thinking about it yesterday. How could I frame this for your audience? General Milley wouldn't look at it that way. An army officer doesn't look at it that way. We have to commit violence. I integrate Machiavelli and Sun Tzu into Sun Tzu, the Artist of Evolution. No one thinks that's evil. No, it's a necessary thing that must be done by someone to sacrifice their society. Machiavelli is saying the exact same thing. And the people that want to paint him as some kind of villain are unrealistic about how life works. It's just not the way it is. Darwin writes about this, and I put this at the end of the conclusion, where Darwin says that nothing is simpler to understand than the survival for the fittest and struggle for existence. But he said it disturbed him. That's what disturbs us about Machiavelli. He's an evolutionary theorist framing human competition in evolutionary terms, and we find it disturbing, just like Darwin did with his theory. And so that's what Machiavellian is, someone who's willing to keep it 100, do what needs to be done, and reduce the violence, because people are always going to emerge in conflict and fight and try to disrupt the existing order of things in order to try to benefit themselves. And they don't care if they disrupt society and get a lot of other people hurt as long as they get what they want. Machiavelli's saying, unless you're willing to do cruel things to stop that cycle from happening, a lot more people are going to get hurt. And as Guns N' Roses said, we don't need no civil war. It feeds the rich and it buries the poor. That's what Machiavelli's saying.
That's true. I mean, it's it's interesting. There's a lot of fight from the emotionalism, victimhood culture that's taken over society that is against stuff like this, because it builds on what eons of time have been, and they're trying to overthrow biology. They're trying to overthrow probably evolution in itself, if you ever study that, and human nature, to flip biology. And they think that somehow by flipping those tables they can re-engineer biology. And you can't re-engineer biology. Biology does not change.
Nope.
It doesn't change on a dime. And it doesn't change when it comes to human behavior and human evolution and human nature. But, there's always the delusional people that will try. It sounds like a cool thing to them. So
in the Sun Tzu, the artist of evolution, I get into that exactly, Chris. I build on top of what I wrote in the Prince of Evolution. And basically, the wisest point of view, and I don't just mean this because I'm a soldier, although some people might roll their eyes. If you don't understand that the defense of the state to ensure that we are naturally selected for existence, all of our family members, our children, our wives, everything, then you don't understand life. That is the imperative. That's why Machiavelli says the subject of the art of war is the most important thing for a prince to know. Because if you cannot ensure that your family and friends are naturally selected for existence, then nothing else is possible. Right. And so really, we've got this modern world where we have this cognitive dissonance. We've separated ourselves, and it's built into ChatGPT. I posted on my TikTok account, my YouTube account last night at david.r.wood, a conversation I had with ChatGPT. And you can see in the first 15 minutes, I have to remove that dissonance of modern society saying, no, listen. Warfare is natural interspecies competition, just like two ant colonies fighting. It's no different than two lion prides fighting over territory. We are a natural species. It's like you have to basically get the ChatGPT to understand that that's logically correct and accurate. And then from that point forward, that's how infantry officers are trained to look at the world. That's how Machiavelli is looking at reality, through the eyes of an infantry officer who's an evolutionary competitor in naturally selective competition. That's what that is. No one teaches you that, but that's the truth, logically. So that's how that book, The Prince of Evolution, is framed. And that's the only way to understand the way Machiavelli is looking at the situation. Anything else is naive and uninformed. I'm sorry. It just is. And some of this stuff that they're talking about making, for example, la-di-da-di, we can all get along. Yeah, we all do. Do yourself a favor. I love The Walking Dead. You know why I loved it? It's because when modern society is stripped away, you get back to evolutionary competitive patterns. That's what's in that show. That's why people are fascinated by it. You see the natural instincts of humans kick in, survival of the fittest. That's what that entire show is about. And that's why we love shows like that. And that's actually what you see as Darwinian competition. You just remove zombies and replace it with lions and tigers and bears, oh my, where our species was once competing with saber-toothed tigers, with other species directly, because we had to survive, not just fight each other. So that swap out zombies and put in bears and tigers and stuff before we had machine guns. And that was our existence millions of years ago. We're lucky we have all these artificial adaptations but I always tell my sister, she laughed at me one time, I go, I don't want to jump in the ocean and go swim around. She's like, why? I go, I'm no longer at the top of the food chain. A shark is. I'm not doing that. But if you go walking around the African savannah without a rifle, you're no longer at the top of the food chain. I hate to break it to you. And people don't think that way until they get attacked by a crocodile when they're on that little raft going down the river in the Zambezi. Dude, think it through, bro. You are, because of your artificial adaptations. That's why we created them. But that can quickly change, right? That can quickly change if you're not careful what you're doing. But people don't think like that, and they should.
Bump into a bear. Yeah, I mean, people seem to want to battle logic and reason, meritocracy. Yeah. They want to live in an emotionalism world where they can be emotional and victimization, and they want a socialist society where everybody gets everything for free. You don't have to work hard to earn anything. You just get everything handed to you. And that's great for some people on the that want to do that. That's not the way worlds are built. That's not the way economies are run. I mean, it's an ugly world. It's not pretty when you say, hey, we have to compete and fight each other for stuff, but the competition actually makes us better and makes us rise as a whole. If we're all just sitting around, laying around, getting communist checks, then see what happens to human nature and human aspirations when there's not given any sort of carrot to go for.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that, Chris, in the car when I was trying to think about what I thought this might come up during this interview, and I was like, that's why communism failed. Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, I'm going to rewrite that book. It's based on evolutionary theory. It's competition. Anything that's not built on competition is unsustainable. So communism was never going to win. And, people just have to realize that the ancient Greeks embraced it. They saw that as excellence. We pushed each other to excellence. Natural selection, the variation of natural selection of the Olympic Games pushed us to become better evolved, become our best. And they saw that as bringing out the best in people because that was the pattern of the gods to them. Mm-hmm. They thought that if we compete like natural species, it'll bring out the best and we'll get the best athletes and it'll help everyone improve. They embraced that competition as part of their culture rather than trying to say, no, we need to make everything even. That's not realistic, right? If you make it even, then you disadvantage those who are superior competitors, right? So that's just the way it is in life. If you change, look at the way they changed the NFL. You change the rules because that's evolutionary competition of another form too. You change the rules, it starts benefiting someone over somebody else on the football field. It's the same thing in human competition of business or anything else. So yeah, it's all humanity. And I'm lucky. My father raised my brother and I to both become Army officers and be very competitive because he realized, he's a great guy, but he was like, dude, life is competitive. If I don't train my sons to think like competitors, view the world as competitors, and be competitive, then they will be at a disadvantage in life. And so I am so grateful to my father that he had the wisdom to train me that way. At the same time, he raised me to have, I'm not just purely competition. I understand why we can't have Rockefeller wiping out every other company in the industry because you can't have, that'll lead to extreme, it's not benefit to consumers. So there's a balance between competition but you want competition, but monopolies eliminate competition. And that's one of the things I love about the American culture is it's built on competition, which is aligned with evolutionary principles. And that's actually what I talk about in the Prince of Evolution. Our entire Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Life is survival, and liberty and pursuit of happiness is ability to evolutionary expand. So our very nation is founded on the two driving forces of natural evolution. That we're the first nation in human history to be founded on those concepts as the driving force and the governance, the vision for our nation, and to organize our entire system of government and capitalism around that. That's in harmony with the evolutionary principles of competition on Earth. And we can't lose sight of that because that's what actually makes us great as a people. And that's what makes us competitive in the world economy and militarily. At the same time, we need to balance that, allowing everyone to compete. You can't allow, big corporations or wealthy people to block out everyone else competing because what will end up happening is you'll get weak over time. That makes you weak. Competition makes you strong. Lack of competition makes you weak. It can either be communism make you weak or large organizations or oligarchs blocking out competition that'll also make you weak over time. Those are two different ends of the extreme. You need to find a happy balance in the middle where you encourage, help people compete, but at the same time, you don't stop people from being able to compete, like barriers to entry, as they talk about in Porter's Five Forces. So that's the kind of stuff that we want to keep our country great. We need to keep ourselves competing and keep ourselves sharp as competitors and know that we always have to continue to evolve as the world evolves. And we can't just rest on our laurels as a culture and as a community. We have to continue to compete like our ancestors did the moment they crossed these shores and started to compete, which they didn't get the chance to do in Europe because the aristocracy wouldn't let them. That's what America's all about. Yep.
Yeah. And it brings out the flourishing of the best aspects of human nature.
Yeah.
And, but these lazy people that want to be emotional and victimhood and live in this victimhood culture, they don't want to do the work. They just rather sit around and complain and be like, can I get everything handed to me for free like my parents did? And this is kind of the culture we bred, but it's important that what you've written to come back to how things really work and what it's about. Fun is fun. So let's plug your website and your work that you do in IT a little bit if you want. Tell us about some of the stuff you do at RSG Federal.
Yeah, Federal is a small business IT contracting firm that supports the Department of Defense of the United States Air Force. We've supported, our company started supporting and has continued to support since 2018, one of the largest digital transformation programs in the federal government. The ITAS program of Air Force Wave 1, the RRE risk reduction effort was an experimental program in RSG Federal. I led a lot of this is this is one of the more public programs because it's quasi-commercial. So a lot of that information is publicly available. You can look it up. And then RSG Federal basically was in the middle of it, leveraging our expertise and myself to ensure that experimental program, which was wild, by the way. In many ways, I was operating like an infantry officer and made sure that program was successful and that Wave 1 then go. We're currently supporting one of the largest deployments of ServiceNow in the federal government, one of the largest programs. So we're really, which supports the cyberspace mission ultimately downstream of the United States Air Force and the Department of Defense. So we're just really happy because worked at the Pentagon, the Navy Yard, DHS headquarters, I've been an Army, ROTC instructor, Army officer, obviously. So it's just really part of our family. All male members of my family obviously served in the Army. So we just really believe in serving our country and supporting the Department of Defense is wonderful. We love doing it, helping to defend Americans and forward preserve our democracy. Yeah, and we're looking to. The reason why I got into this, ironically, Chris, was I read Thomas. I was doing an intellectual property effort to develop IP for my company so I could win government contracts. Somehow I got down this rabbit hole of evolutionary theory by accident after I read Thomas Siebel's book, Digital Transformation: How to Survive Mass Extinction. He organized this entire book on the concept of punctuated equilibrium, a natural evolutionary concept. And that's where I got the idea, because I realized that was VUCA conditions in the military, and ITIL talks about VUCA conditions in the digital age, all went hand in hand. And I was like, hey, if Thomas Siebel's a billionaire, I'd like to be a billionaire. So I went and read Darwin's book, and I realized, hey, I already know all these concepts. Just like Siebel selected a natural evolutionary concept to describe extreme digital disruption, I understood that most of the concepts in Darwin's book, or all of them basically, I already knew them all, and they were all built into the ITIL Foundation's book and framework. And I was like, whoa, looks like evolutionary concepts are where it's at in terms of the digital age. So my book, ITIL 4, Artificial Evolutionary Framework, I got to work on the title, but it's going to be reframing the digital age and applying evolutionary concepts to help CEOs and CIOs and digital transformation officers in organizations, both the DoD and corporations, learn how they need to organize and structure and operate in the digital age using evolutionary concepts, which are also the same concepts found in Sun Tzu's The Art of War. So in a way, military theory is evolutionary theory. It's the closest field to evolutionary theory, believe it or not. Yeah, nobody says that, but it basically is. And so Sun Tzu is literally selecting patterns in nature and applying them for competitive advantage. In fact, it was so funny. In order to do research for Sun Tzu, the Artist of Evolution, I went and watched The Hunt with David Attenborough on Netflix because I needed to select patterns from nature to explain to people what Sun Tzu is trying to say. So really what we're going to start seeing is a convergence of philosophy, which is really evolutionary theory, digital transformation, and military theory, which is really evolutionary theory, and ITIL and best practices, which are all chock full of evolutionary theory, with my theory of artificial evolution and natural evolutionary theory. These things are all going to converge and digitally disrupt all competitive fields of human activity, every university system, and human thought. And that's kind of where we're going. Basically, it's where I'm leading. That's what, and I'm going to continue to publish more books replicating the exact same pattern that I've discovered accidentally, by the way, which I kind of randomly run into it by accident. So
pattern recognition in human behavior and society and how the universe works. I mean, it's been around with this for eons of time. There's a reason these tomes like The Prince, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and other things, all were written thousands of years ago, 10,000 years ago, whatever. Pick your book, and they still are true today as they stand as you kind of think of maybe the old world of people as like a bunch of cavemen running around. They were actually pretty darn smart, and they may have been smarter than us because they weren't looking at their phones all day long. So they were actually sitting in thought, thinking. What a concept. So the final thoughts as we go out, tell people.
Yeah, they can pick actually, up the book, in The Prince, and in The Prince, Machiavelli keeps selecting concepts from the Roman Republic that he wants a new prince to emulate. I'm going to write a book called on the Roman Republic and how they mastered all the concepts of evolution incorporated into their mos mereum and their legionary system. So the entire Roman Republic over time, the Senate of Rome, identified the same patterns in nature that the ITIL framework did, the same patterns in nature Sun Tzu and Machiavelli did, and they incorporated evolutionary concepts into how they ran their government and how they ran their military. That is one of the reasons, and their entire culture is based on evolutionary concepts. The Romans were so wise, but they were not like the Greeks. They weren't theoretical. They were practical people. So they were like basically building evolutionary best practice frameworks, just ITIL, and they were building it into how they operated, and that's what gave them a massive competitive advantage as a culture and as a society, a government, and as military over everybody else. Like, for example, in the ITIL book, I show that the Roman legion and how it operates is pretty much the same as ITIL 4, and they both are doing it to operate in VUCA conditions. VUCA for the battlefield and VUCA for digital transformation. But essentially, they're evolving the same concepts and in the same trajectory because they're both operating in VUCA conditions of a different variation. And so I plan on writing an entire book, Evolutionary Reframing, the entire history of the Roman Republic and their entire culture.
Wow, those will be amazing in your series. So give us your .coms as we go out so people can check them out on the internet.
Yeah, so I have a YouTube channel. It's at DRWREvol. I'm now actually taking hour-long discussions with ChatGPT and recording them and posting them so people can see how Gemini, Google, and Claude AI are actually confirming the existence of my scientific discovery, the logical validity of it. I posted one on my TikTok and YouTube last night for this discussion so they can see how Machiavelli, it confirms he's an evolutionary thinker. And the thing I said about the Declaration of Independence, ChatGPT confirms it. Yeah, it knows. And I'm going to continue to produce those on my YouTube channel, which is david.r.wood, and start posting those on social media as I continue to publish books to show that that my scientific discovery is valid and will become. And also one of the ones I'm going to do within the next couple of weeks is how my theory will subsume the cultural evolutionary field. And my wife wants me to start doing live streams on the weekend. So I'll probably start doing some live streams. People can log in and see me real time and they can put in questions they want to ask. I think it'll be kind of fun, actually, as I continue to publish books. And I'm also going to be joining, hopefully getting accepted to an anthropology department to start my PhD. So that way I can start sharing and publishing my professional journals. And then I'm going to be looking to win government contracts. So I'm on a full campaign to spread the discovery of the theory of artificial evolution by means of artificial selection in a unique way that's never been done in history, engaging with academia, businesses, AI, social media, and publication of books. Because based on my discussions with ChatGPT, people tend to resist new scientific discoveries like they did Ramanujan, Einstein, and others. So I'm using an asymmetric strategy to rapidly digitally disrupt society in a way that'll accelerate the acceptance of my theory that's never been attempted in history before.
Wow. That'll be definitely interesting to see. Thank you very much for coming on the show, Dave. We really appreciate it.
Okay, it's a pleasure, Chris. Have a great time. We'll see you next time for Sun Tzu.
Order it up, folks, wherever fine books are sold. The Prince of Evolution, out October 11th, 2024, by David R. Wood. Thanks to artists for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss. Chris Voss won the TikTok and all those crazy place on the internet. Be good to each other. Stay safe. We'll see you next time. And that should have us.